Hi, good evening. So it's going to be a challenge because the sun is right coming into the eyes, and I don't know how much of the slide where can you see. But anyway, the slide deck is going to be there, and I'm going to have a conversation with you built around what I have observed. And I'm on a board of a company called Smart Carrot, which is in the customer success space. And I will not be doing any advocacy of customers or Smart Carrot. So I have a neutral position here today. But if you do want to know more about it, maybe there is a colleague over here who've come in or not come in, they will be coming in. You can chat with them, or you can reach out to me subsequently. You can move slides here. So the challenge of customer success has been that everyone knows customer success. We've been there, we've done it, and we know it all. And the reality is that customer success is not new. But the customer success that we know of has largely been in the analogous world. Because where it was very, very driven by personalities, individuals and their behaviors and their relationships. However, in today's world, the things have shifted to digital. And that kind of creates complexity. Earlier, you would deal with transactions, you would had a problem, you would call a number, you would have a person on the other side giving you the customer care that they defined, and it was largely a customer resolution approach, okay? It was not about customer success, but customer resolution was treated in those days as customer success, that we have reduced the number of calls that we are getting on the desk. So it was not about customer engagement, it was reducing number of customer complaints and reducing and improving the velocity of customer resolution through using automatic techniques and automation techniques. The same is also being done in the space of digital services, or in the, transactional services, where you would go to a location to get a service done, and depending upon the person on the other side of the counter, you had a good experience or you had a bad experience. You had a person with great empathy who understood your problem and served you in an amicable fashion, and you realized the value of that service. However, today's world, in the digital world, that has changed. What has changed is that in the digital world, we now are calling it e-care. And e-care has various services bundled behind it. It could be an automated bot, it could be a voice recognition software, it could be an interactive menu, it could be a website link, etc., and it could be then RPA-based technology running a chatbot session with you, and so on and so forth. The other thing that has happened is that earlier, empathy for your transaction was left to the individual. But today, more and more digital services have come in, which have been seen as more valuable because you don't have to deal with people who can be painful. So you are getting those transactions done much faster. But there is a challenge. We are leaving behind a set of people who are not very digitally savvy, who cannot be served through this digital service channel, be it on the e-care side of it or enabling digital support. However fancy the digital platform that you are operating. So one opening remarks that I would like to leave behind with you is, when you are looking at customer success, please also look at the people that you are leaving behind. People who will not be happy to deal with the service of customer success that you provide in the nature that you are providing today. And look at the people that you are leaving behind who could be ahead of the curve or people who are behind the curve. Okay? Next slide. My table of content is very simple. We will talk about why is customer success relevant for everyone. We will talk about what are the key people talking about and seeing in the customer success space. We will also talk about why beyond the human touch. And we have a technology panel here which is going to spend more time, but I'm just going to throw some highlights on top of that. And finally, my set of recommendations that if you are a company which is chasing long tail or high value customers, or what I call the short tail, then what should your approaches be and why those approaches are relevant and important. And finally, some conclusion remarks from my side. And if there will be time, we will have a Q&A. Otherwise, I'm here and we can chat up. Next slide, please. So analogous firms and all digital native firms are tending to adopt some form of customer success. And the approaches are cosmetic. Why do I say they are cosmetic? Because they tend to create departments. Once the department is created, some rebranding of people gets done inside the organization who are now called customer success leaders or customer success teams, without very clearly understanding what their objectives are and what is the outcome that they will likely to produce. Okay? And that leads to some of the challenges. However, one other thing that I often see is that most of the customer success organizations which have seen the success in customer success are largely pivoting around two things. One is reaching out to relationships that they forgot about. So they are now in a rhythm of being connected with all the customers, and the systems are reminding them that you have been out of touch with this customer, it is time to go back and talk to this customer, it is important because he gets you a certain MRR and ARR, or he gets you a fixed price contract. The other thing is that you are most worried about, and where customer success has got the attention, is that we are moved into a consumption-based economy. And in a consumption-based economy, retention becomes critical because there is no long-term binding contract. And it allows you to, if you don't get the attention and if the problem is not getting solved, or if you change the interface and you come to version 2 of the product, customers move out because they don't like the version 2 of the product. And if the company is not willing to go back to the version 1, you are likely to see churn and difficulty in managing retention. So that's really the critical path. Next slide. Now, I'm sure if you are an avid reader or you are a follower, you would have seen this. And Forrester essentially says that there are some new use cases of customer success. What are those cases? One is managing expectation. A service is an undefined service. You can negotiate a service. In a product, the definitions are defined. And you have to ensure that the expectations are managed in what the product can deliver. So the first goal of customer success teams are to ensure that customers who are onboarded to their product or to their services are being managed within the boundary or within the expectation that your product and services can deliver. If not, you are likely to get churn, and you are likely to get a poor rating, and you are likely to get a beating in the market where you are competing. The other important thing that you need to look at is that if you are successful in retaining customers, okay, and you are not managing those customers, okay, then you have a challenge. Let me explain this. I'm sure the customers that you serve or organizations that you are working with, organizations do see change in priorities. And because those priorities change, the needs from the products that you are using also changes. Now, most of the time that the implementations which have been done only serve an old use case, not the new use case. Okay? So your product becomes it's a misfit. It's no longer a perfect fit. That is one. The second is, the challenge that you have is not just being a misfit, the employees who were propagating your product and had built the culture around your product, if their retention is worrisome in that organization, if those champions leave the company, there is no one taking that relationship forward. And you would get a hit. So one of the key things that you need to look at is, how do you move away from this individualistic approach to a systematic approach of engaging with your customers? So that's very, very critical, because otherwise you have really not begun the customer success journey. You are moved to the digital way of dealing with customers, but you have really not started the customer journey in a true way. Next slide. Now, clearly, Gartner has given a lot of things to consume, and I have caught up with some people, and obviously, if you have to change the way individuals work, you also have to change the way you consume information or data. And one of the things that lies within the organizations is a humongous set of data, humongous set of transactions, and each of these data sets and transactions reveal something different than what the leadership believes that they have in a relationship between the customer or how the customer has rated your products and services. So it is important that you start analyzing every data, and the data has to be analyzed more from the dispersion, from the averages, okay, rather than being consistent information. So most of the time, customer success teams, when they focus on, am I doing the right thing? That's the process side of it. But you have to find the variations, the variants in your processes, why it is not working, and why customers are excited with a certain way of things. Can you adopt the new way of doing things? And can you go visit back the customers who are not so very happy with the way you are serving them, okay, or the way that your transactions have been executed? And can you learn and improve your processes? And ultimately, if you have to use data insight, you have to use analytics, and you have to automate processes, then one key important thing is, in operations world, we used to call it run books. In the customer side, in the customer success area, you call it playbooks. Why playbooks? It's important to understand. Because playbooks change based on the persona that you are interacting with. So you will interact very differently with the supply chain leader versus customer care leader versus a CFO versus a business head versus an operational role holder. So their urgency needs would be very different, and they pivot on different problem statements. So do you have a set answer or a set of actions which will lead to a better experience than playing the same rule book for everyone? Second could be age profile. Third could be gender, could be digital native, not a digital native. Okay, and many, many things around that. So persona becomes very important. To develop the persona, it is very important that you understand patterns. And that is when technology firms in CS place help you to collect all this data, do some insights, and help you to put it in patterns which you can map to certain personas. And those personas help you to create the right playbooks which your customer success teams can manage and deliver efficient results. Next slide, please. Now, let us see what the big customer success teams or technology firms are advocating. And I've been a user of Gainsight myself, and it was very, very good initially because it was really the leader and there was no one around to match it and provide a service. But it has also become very complicated, and especially because it was largely focused on insight. So it became very difficult to deploy the same template across diverse set of customers and diverse set of teams. Whereas if you look at the modern tools that are out there, they seem to be doing better, and I'm not saying Gainsight is not doing it. Gainsight is doing it successfully, but my experience over the few years that I've played in this technology space is that you have to find the right partner based on your challenges that you have. So if you're an enterprise, you should look at a high-end solution. If you are an early stage startup, your needs are very different. And if you are a scaling startup, your needs are very different. So do understand that while selecting that. Next slide. Now, one of the key things that one has examined, and kind of it's out there, is that you need to look at collaboration. The biggest challenge in customer success seems to be a problem developed internally because we've created departments, and departments have created silos, and these silos have largely been created because you are having a competitive organization. So if you are driven by essentially a KPA or a KPI, and your bonus is involved, and your department's bonus is involved with KPA and KPI, you are likely to head into trouble zone, where collaboration will not be forthcoming. But if you have moved on to OKRs, where everything that you do has an incremental improvement, and you are recognized for the incremental improvement that you deliver, and you head towards that journey of meeting that number, collaboration becomes much easier. So focus on collaboration. The other thing that needs to be focused on going forward is the actionable insights. Okay, actionable insights do deliver more valuable results, okay, and help us to improve and focus on the priorities that the organization have. And there are two sets of priorities that one notices. One is NPS, our Net Promoter Score, because a lot of companies want this NPS data to be sticking out there on their websites. That's the first tagline that people would want to. Oh, because it's coming right in my eyes, so I'll like to move it back. Okay, better? So that becomes very critical. The other is that the majority of the people want customer insights, but they do not know what is the insight that they want. So they're struggling with defining the customer insights, because the use cases that they approach, okay, are far and wide. And the companies that give them the answer, okay, are using the product and technology-based practices. So if you've not done a good fit match, okay, you are likely to, in an operating world, not see the value of that platform. The leaders will see the value because they think they've invested in the technology, selected the technology, and it should generate value. Whereas the operational team will find it very difficult to get value out of the system. So when you are selecting customer success technology, it is important to define the use cases and define the use cases as a journey. What's the current problem that you will have? And I'll talk about some of that journey. And it could be that your churn or retention could be your problem, or a renewal could be a problem. So do you want to go to avoid churn? Process is very different. Do you want to ensure retention? Problem is very different. If you are focused on renewal, the problem is very different. They seem to be, from a revenue perspective, as your business leaders will think, they're actually the same coin. They're the same face. There are different sides of the coin. They are not. One is a head and one is a tail, and you can't have a Sholay film every time around. You can't have two heads. Okay? So it's important to realize that when you are approaching the problem, you need to understand the data that you need. So just to give you an example, to one of the big ed tech firms was worried about retention of its customers. And as Shankar said, that these guys then quickly, if the retention was done, they were focusing on upselling. The same person who was responsible for retention was also responsible for upselling. And it did not work. And they got very bad press, media, and the firm had to really redesign their organization. Because these are two different behavioral skills. Okay? What is a behavioral skill which is different? When you are upselling, you are asking an open-ended probe. When you are focused on renewal, your technique is closed-ended in nature. So there are two different approaches, and the data insights that you will need are very different. Okay? Next slide, please. Now, one of the key things that one has seen is that from tier 1 companies, many tier 1 companies are ahead of the journey because they have pivoted around either a customer service or a customer product, or they are justifying that we would like a good churn. A churn is a good because my product cannot serve that use case and I have adopted that customer, and if it exits faster, it is good for my business. Because I do not want a negative customer to stay in my ecosystem for too long a time. So churn can be good. So churn is not always bad, because you cannot serve everyone's needs. Don't try to be the joker that you can fit it into any deck of cards or any rummy game that you are playing. Be yourself. So know the relevance of your business model and what kind of customers you can serve and what kind of customers you should avoid. So that is number one, and that's really what tier 1 companies tend to drive their customer success on. Do we need long tail, and which long tail we would like to retain, because that could be the new revenue generator for us, or that industry segment, or that set of technologies will scale much faster than the others. So why should we carry the laggards? Okay? So it's important to understand that. The second thing that you need to focus on is that too early for smaller organizations, do not focus on ROI. What's the return on investment? Okay? That will derail you. Focus on, can you start measuring the value that you are delivering to the customer? So customer success is nothing but a value delivery journey. Start defining what is the value that you want to deliver. How do I put measurements around it? What's the process for capturing that value? And do I remain relevant in the customer's journey? Is my value consistent? Or is my value going up and down? Okay? So it's very, very important. So if you go to the hotel with your girlfriend, that experience is very different in that hotel. You go with your wife, that experience is very different. If you go with your mother-in-law, the experience will be different. Right? But you cannot match that entire value being consistent across 3. If you are, then you stay the age of nirvana. Then why worry about business? Why worry about relationships? Because if you cannot differentiate between your girlfriend, your wife, and your mother-in-law, then God help you. Okay? You should not be living in this world. You should go to the Himalayas. Next slide. This is an interesting section. While I'm going to just spend very little time on this because you are going to debate and talk about this. But essentially, as I talked about earlier, that customer technology is largely about moving away from human-driven actions and building an organization-driven action. So organizations have sometimes seen good customer handling behaviors disappear as that customer success team or customer handling team disappears. And an organization culture has not been built, as Gartner had said. Organization culture is very, very critical in managing customer success. And how does culture build? Culture does not build because someone said culture, we've got a culture, and we put a policy statement out there, customers are important to us. Every government office has a Mahatma Gandhi saying, right? You remember the Mahatma Gandhi saying on customer care? Every office has that. But what's your experience in the government office when you go? You are not relevant, right? They are relevant. You have to stand in a queue. Your needs come much later. Their ability to drink their tea at 10:30 when you are standing right in front of them is more critical than ability to serve you. Okay, so their behaviors become important. So what is important is that when you are looking at technology, you have to essentially move your organization to a customer success value chain. Okay, which means that you have to define as part of the customer success, what are the things that you want to do? Are you focusing on churn? Are you focusing on retention? Are you focusing on upselling? Are you focusing on the product adoption? What are you focusing on? And are you focusing on the product growth? Is it product-led or is it service-led? What is that value that is going to make the difference? Next slide. Now, most of the customer success tools I look at I tend to see that they are largely focused around negative insights. When I say negative insights, they are largely focusing on the negativity that is happening there rather than the positive actions that the team is doing. And a customer success team, if it has to be your face of the brand, okay, then you have to create positive instincts in them and you have to build positivity. To build positivity, you have to find measures of what is happening well while also recognizing the fact what is not going well or what's the scope of improvement. So when you change from negative feedback to scope of improvement, it becomes more actionable insight rather than when you are saying this is not doing well, you are failing the person. So a lot of customer success technology tools tend to say this process is failed. What's the scope of improvement has to be understood and identified. That's the beauty of customer success technology. Products, they can tell you where you are going wrong and where is the opportunity to improve. And improvement is really what keeps us positive about ourselves and all about the organizations that we work and the customers that we serve. Next slide. Now, most of the approaches that we've seen, because they're manual, they're very rigorous processes. How many have you documented customer success processes in your organization? Raise your hand. And how many times have you referred to those manuals? And how often do you refer to those manuals? Once in a month? Twice a month? Okay. Anyone better than twice a month? Used to. Good, good. Okay, they used to do once a week, read it, update it. You reviewed whether we were still compliant to the process or not. So it was done by the delivery team or by an auditor? Oh, okay. So 5 people, they're driven by emotion, so they will do everything. Okay. Okay. But essentially, the challenge of documented processes, and when documented processes is mapped to the technology platforms that you are going to use, is that you will find inconsistencies. The classroom training on the documented processes is very different than the way the technology is served in front of you. Just the screen formatting, the screen movements, action from one screen to the other screen. Okay? And that leads to disrespecting the way that you manage your customers. So can you build your processes around the technologies that you have invested in, so that you are adopting the technology rather than the process handbook? Because the good news out there, and that's a very good news, the good news out there is that there is no certification on customer success out there which is ISO certified. So you really don't have to chase the process compliance. You have to chase the real outcome, customer success. And if you can drive customer success by using the technology and reviewing the deviations that the technology platform generates, your process would be live and kicking. Okay, and you can keep identifying new personas and new patterns rather than making it static. Okay, and it will become like a Mahabharata or a Ramayana. Important to read, but not follow. Okay, so it's important that you understand that when you are moving from a manual process to automated process, center it around the technology platforms of choices and the integration of these technologies that you bring on to play, so that becomes a process that you are serving and you are working with, rather than a process handbook. Okay, and get your people to get trained on the technology platforms that they're going to use, so that they are not worried about, no, the process handbook said this, but I'm doing this here, and the customer has a third opinion. Okay, next slide. Now, essentially, one of the key things that we've all noticed, and I've talked about it, is that you have to identify how your product is being used by customers differently. And how do you identify that? Is the problems that they come to you with, or the challenges of adoption that they have, or the challenges of retention that you have. Can you get those insights and try to churn and saying what are the new use cases that we are missing out, what are the new use cases that we can develop? Because your customer is really seeing the value of your product. The problem is that most of the sales engine and customer success team who are driven by quota are driven by what has worked in the past will work in the future. Right? So that's the challenge. Whereas the reality is that when you're driving a car, you need to look at the rear view mirror once in a while, but you really have to be focused on the windshield, or what is happening on real time here and now, not what has happened in the past. Okay? So real time insights are more critical to you rather than the past data and the past analytics. Okay? So customer success teams cannot be driven by old data. And if the data is old, it is no longer actionable. Because data is like a perishable commodity. It's like a perishable commodity on airline tickets or a hotel room. The deep discounts come in. Okay? Next slide, please. So this is the final section, and I will attempt in this section to largely focus around why customer success is not to be limited to just the NPS, the churn, the retention, the renewal, okay, or upselling, but you need to focus on onboarding. Okay? Bring customer success on onboarding when your customer is signed up with the contract, and when the customer is onboarding to your platform, what are the challenges and how can you serve the customer better during the onboarding life cycle, because that becomes the first level of disappointment. The second is managing the velocity of stages. When I say velocity, you have obviously the customer signs up, customer onboards, customer experiences the first value, okay? Customer gets a renewal, okay? Employees change. Is that value being delivered is consistent, or is the value failing or changing? So you need to measure that. The other thing that you need to focus is that can your customer success be driven for betterment rather than by just absolute numbers? So for example, if you were to adopt OKRs, saying I need a rating of 4.8, but I am at 3.5 today. Over the next 3 months, have I reached 3.7? Has my customer success moved that agenda from 3.5 to 3.7? If it has, it is for betterment. It is, if you don't meet that 4.8, don't worry about it. Because customer success is a painful process. It's an operational process. It's like building a house, brick by brick. When you get the outer structure ready, you realize that more work is to be done inside. When you get the inside work done, you realize when you shift into the house, oh, more improvements could have been done. Okay? So it's an operational task. Okay? Next slide. So most of the customer success strategies have been largely driven on acquisition. That how do I retain the customer? How do I lose the customer? How do I renew customer? How do I upsell customer? The challenge with that is that it is driven by past success and not by future. So the way forward essentially is not just to prevent leakages, but find opportunities, okay, of new markets and new usage, and finding out where the processes are broken, so that the improvement on those broken processes can be done. And the customer success teams have to be a neutral team which is working with the product management group, with the operational teams, and as well as with the sales team. Now there is a new buzzword. How many of you have heard of customer success ops? Few of you. Good. So customer success ops is really the big buzz. Why is it important? Because they have to ensure that if the organization is broken down and organization continues to operate in silos, the front face of the organization seems to be collaborative and unifying brand. You don't shift the problem to someone else. You don't transfer the problem to someone else. In customer care, the approach is, I deal with the problem, I can't deal with the problem, I've escalated. I can't deal, I have escalated to the regional manager, etc., etc. So you are showing lack of customer care in this approach. If you go to the product technology groups, if you go to an automation, oh, we can't serve you, you continue to go on that digital loop. In an infinite loop, the humans get tired, the digital loop does not get tired. So you can keep going back and keep going that same stuff and you don't get any outcomes. So that is why customer success teams have to be largely collaborative. The second important behavioral skill, and I noticed that you have on the agenda an interviewing panel, is to see customer success teams. One key behavioral skill is how can they influence others without controlling those departments, organizations, or assets. So influencing others and impacting others is very, very critical behavioral skills. If you don't have it, I would encourage you to develop those skills. Next slide, please. In my view, there are different approaches for long tail and short tail. And what you see in front of you is clearly the long tail approach. And if you want to see more of this, there is already a blog on this on medium.com with my name, Arvind-Mehrotra.medium.com. If you search, you will get these articles there. Okay? So the critical in long tail is that you need to ensure that you anchor the customer success team with your product management team. The people who are building the product or delivering the value from that product or delivering the use cases of the product, they must know, not just the marketing team, but also the product management team. Because the product management team can fill the loop to the marketing, but marketing does not give the loop to the product management team. Because most of the challenges in long tail is that customers don't even know about you, don't even know the customer journey. There is no face to it. Okay, it's all automated. So you need to ensure that the product management team is upping the game and is driven by not only the backlog, right? The backlog basket, but you have to create it into the most favorable product or most valuable product. So MVP used to be what? What was MVP? Minimum viable product. The customer success team's outcome has to be convert that minimal viable product to most valuable product. That's the outcome. That's the nature of the business of customer success. Next slide. So the challenge of in long tail or short tail is that in short tail, customers find that they get a lot of attention. Good NPS surveys get done. NPS surveys are discussed at the CXO level in detailed basis. Improvement action plans are drawn. But then you go back and close that action plan. Survey is completed. You go back to your own normal routines and lack of collaboration. So organizations which are in the service space are now building the CS ops teams to ensure that whatever commitments have been given to customers, to these organizations, they are driven by the customer ops team because they have multiple role holders. So I'll give you an example. You may be serving a customer in one set of that division. The customer may be seeing value coming from you and they may be your promoter. But there is another part of the organization which is a detractor. And there is a larger part of the organization which are passives. How do you find consistent approaches for this? What approach do you see? So what do we do as leaders? And I have done that in my past life. I will say whatever is looking best for me, I will take that metrics forward. And I will say that metrics which is the detractor, that guy is an idiot. So first of all, I start recognizing that my customer is an idiot. Right? The customer doesn't get it. I am better than the customer. As soon as you take that approach, the short tail starts failing. And I lose the big advantage that I have in short tail, that I have the management attention, I have a dedicated team for this. I can move to an advisory role. Now, where business advisory is good enough, can I move to a disaster advisory or a business continuity advisory? That is a critical. You must understand that the companies who are using your products and they are running certain critical processes of your products, they need to know if your product fails or product dies down or it is not available, how will my business run? So can you help them to prepare for that business continuity? And can you go back and create a newer product for these short tail customers who are willing to pay a premium? Okay, it could be just a difference in the hosting strategy. Okay, that you saying, okay, I may do multi-cloud strategy. My platform is available on Azure, is also available on Google or on AWS. So that if Azure goes down, it is unlikely that the other competitors will go down. Except that if China decides to do fiber cut in Taiwan and Singapore, then God help you. But nevertheless, then you can do a geo-cluster based approach that you are segregated in different places. Next slide. So finally, I think the summary that I would want to leave behind with you is that customer success is an operational function and thus build strategies, systems, and supporting resources to meet that objective. But it is very, very critical for you to define what objectives are you chasing on customer success. So is it a new whitewash of sales, some poor sales guys who are not very effective but are good in relationship and good in empathy have been branded as customer care or customer success? Or some delivery folks who have the ability to sell and do a lot of upselling, you have shifted them to customer success? If that is an approach, then you are not in the customer success journey. However, if you are building a long-term objective of saying that I, on a continuous basis, ensure that any relationship that I have, in personal or private, public space, as an individual or as a corporate, my relationship is improving week on week, quarter on quarter, month on month, quarter on quarter. I wish you all the success. Thank you.